Hi people, today we're going to look at how to write strong responses to the personality section. These slides are going to go relatively quickly, so if you need to take notes, feel free to hit the pause button, write some notes down. Okay, so the basic thing in a personality section is a good response will answer the question. It's going to include relevant, detailed and accurate information, and it will use a range of historical terms. In part B, you're going to have to make a judgment. That means your response is going to need to be structured as an essay and not as a narration. So before you attempt either part A or part B, the key is to prepare for your personality response. You need to know the relevant information on Wilson, so use your syllabus. Make sure you have notes on every dot point and that your notes are specific and accurate. You can add your historian quotes to your notes so that you have a clear relationship of what they said about each event. In the exam, part A is going to focus on the context, the background and the rise to prominence, and part B will probably focus on part 4 of the syllabus, which is your evaluation section. Okay, now let's have a look at a paper. So in 2016, the part A question was describe 3 significant events in the life of Wilson. Now notice that to do well, you need to have detailed and relevant descriptions of 3 significant events, and you need to use a range of historical terms and concepts. And that's it. For part A, you don't need to have a full essay structure. So let's look at the question again and think, could you actually answer it? Can you describe 3 significant events in the life of the personality you have studied in detail? So make a skeleton of 3 events you intend to focus on, and I want you to think, how much detail do you note? In your study notes, I really recommend you revise 5 events. Make sure you include the election in 1912. The US entry into war and Paris Peace Conference are important, and they overlap with core. And make sure you know about Wilson's defeat of the League of Nations with Congress. You can add a couple of other events, at least one other event of your choosing. Detail looks a bit like this. Now, how you organise your notes is very much up to you, but I tend to have, if I'm looking at the 1912 election, the big picture of what actually happened, so the key outcome. Then I have the participants, the issues they discussed, and how the campaign was run. So I have the outcome, the broad picture, then I have some details. Note that it answers the question in the very first sentence. Woodrow Wilson's life was profoundly affected by his election as president, event 1, his decision to commit the United States to fight in World War II, so that's event 2, and his participation in the Paris Peace Conference, that's event 3. All 3 events contributed to his significance as a statesman and resulted in lasting change. The word significance links to the question. Bottom line, your first sentence has to answer the question. So don't start with Wilson was born. That phrase never answers the question. If you feel a need to show that you know when he was born and died, then put his dates in brackets. Okay, let's move on to having a look at a paragraph. You'll follow your introduction with 3 paragraphs, 1 for each event. Okay, remember the question asks you to describe an event. So description means that you provide the characteristics and features. This paragraph opens with the 1912 election featured 3 candidates advocating progressive reforms to address the inequities of the new industrial era. Okay, so the first sentence is obviously making an effort to address the question and to relate to the verb of the question. Take your time to read on over the remainder of the paragraph and move on when you're ready. Now people, there are a couple of key points I want you to take from the way that this particular paragraph was drafted. The first is you are rewarded for relevant and accurate details. I haven't discussed the background of Teddy Roosevelt. I haven't discussed the background of Fatty Taft. The reason is that this response is trying to stay on topic. The focus is Wilson. When you are drafting, use the active and not the passive voice. If you write Wilson did something, you're conveying who did what and that's two specific facts. If you use a passive voice, something happened, you're only conveying one fact, and it normally takes more words to convey that one fact. The second thing is use adjectives. If you say the Republican Taft, rather than Taft who was a Republican, you're going to find it's much easier to put into your sentences, and it conveys the key information as quickly as possible. The next points are based on your responses in the last exam. Basically, don't waste time on generalizing. Statements such as all elections are important simply annoy the examiner. History is not English. You do not need to define your key terms. If you use a historically significant term correctly, such as Democrat or Republican, then you've demonstrated your understanding. You don't need to define it. So I would like you to practice writing an introduction and one paragraph in about 8 to 10 minutes. Then go back and try to edit your work. See if you can make it clearer and add more technical terms. Be critical. For example, Presbyterian is more exact than Christian. Think how you can use the most specific and detailed information in the least possible number of words. People, there are practice papers on the web and on Google Classroom. I'm more than happy to look any draft responses with you. Okay, the next point is both the Catholic trial paper and the independent trial paper this year ask students to link significant events with their impact on Wilson. Basically means that you need to be able to say not just what happened, but why it's important. That's particularly significant for his background. If you want to say that Wilson was dyslexic, it's an interesting fact, but the real issue is how did it affect him as a president and as a statesman. So think how you can carry forward your facts to his conduct. There's 3 examples on this slide. Have a read, move forward when you're ready. Okay, people, so let's summarize part A. You need to learn relevant and accurate details for every dot point of the syllabus. And you need to practice your writing. When you're writing, focus on the key skills of answering the question. See if you can include specific and accurate details in as few words as possible. You can use the active voice and adjectives to help you achieve that. And just check you've got a range of historic terms. Okay, now let's have a look next at part B of the 2016 paper, where the question was a quote followed by a direction. So the quote is, differing perspectives and interpretations assist us in gaining an understanding of the personality's significance in history. To what extent is this statement accurate in relation to the personality you have studied? Okay, so to answer a part B question, you need to read it carefully. You need to plan how you're going to answer it, and then you need to attack the question in your response. Your aim should be that you answer the question in the very first sentence of your response. The balance of your introduction should set out arguments that you're going to raise to support your answer. Now, the reason you need to do that shows in the assessment criteria. You need to have a clear evaluation of the accuracy of the statement as it relates to your person, and that is going to have to be supported by detailed, relevant and accurate historical knowledge. So you need to flag which events you're going to display your knowledge about. You need to communicate using a sustained, logical and cohesive assessment. Those 3 words basically mean you're going to need an essay style. And the final point is you need a range of historical terms. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So when we have a look at a sample answer, the first statement is, the statement is highly accurate in developing an understanding of the significance of Woodrow Wilson. So the first sentence does answer the question. The next sentences tell the examiner the evidence that's going to be used. So Wilson led America in World War I, so it's going to talk about World War I, was pivotal in the formation of the League of Nations, and domestically, Wilson oversaw significant economic and social reforms, culminating in the 19th Amendment in 1920. So that's 3 issues. People, in Part B, you don't have a full 45 minutes to write this section. 3 is pretty much the maximum number of events you could deal with in any depth. Now, this introduction finishes with different interpretations and perceptions assist in understanding and evaluating his significance as both a president and a statesman. What you should notice is the number of words of the question that appear in the first paragraph of the response. It's making a genuine effort to answer the question using the words of the question. Okay. People, it's very tempting to just absolutely write down as much as you know and dump down facts in an exam situation. In Part B, you really need to plan. This slide reflects a dump down. Okay, there's lots of facts that we know that relate to the US entry into World War I and that relate to different perspectives of it. But the key one is here, that if you look at the different perspectives on the entry into World War I, it illustrates the benefits of having multiple views in understanding Wilson's significance. So if I was writing my paragraph, I would probably start here. I would then use the different views, isolationism, how Roosevelt responded, modern interpretations by Cooper and by Berg, as ways of giving evidence and examples to show those different views. So Roosevelt was highly critical, Cooper and Berg are far more sympathetic. The final point on this slide is that the significance or importance of America's entry into the war was really reflected in Wilson's reception in Paris. Now, I might mention that at the end of my paragraph as a link to discussing the League of Nations, and the reason I would do that is to give cohesion to my essay. The simplest way to make sure you have cohesion is that you relate your main points back to the question. So people, keep in mind peel paragraph structure. Okay, let's bring that all together. To do well in Part B, you should be planning a response. Your aim should be to answer the question and to support that answer with detailed and accurate knowledge. So the actual content is quite similar to Part A. Keep in mind that Part B has the additional layer that you really do need an essay structure. That means introduction, pure paragraphs, and conclusion. In your essay, you should use the question, and if you're given a quote, you really need to incorporate the words of the quote in your responses. Okay, people, that's it for the actual essay structure. Just want to move back for a minute, literally, for the content knowledge. You need to have a detailed understanding of Wilson's actions at Paris at the peace conferences, not simply for the personality section, but also for the call. Read over this slide and add to your notes if you need. Make sure that when you are writing about Lloyd George and writing about Clemenceau, that you give them their proper titles. It's not good enough to just say they were a leader. And moving on, this slide has two excellent quotes by Wilson on his attitudes towards segregation. You may wish to add them to your notes. I particularly like that Wilson said it was altogether inadvisable for a coloured man to enter Princeton. Your final slide of content is a little bit of bonus material on women. It's taken from a blog by a journalist. Just read over it, make sure it makes sense to you. It's a good way of testing, do you know enough about both wives, Ellen Axent and Edith Galt. Okay, people, and that's it. If you want to carry out some practice essays, please do so. I'm always available to review them. I know Miss Sefter will be delighted. And good luck as you prepare for your exams.